The soil clung to Alara Varn's fingertips, gritty and cool, as she knelt in her garden at dawn. Her hands, calloused from years of tending roses, moved with reverence, coaxing a final crimson bloom from a weary bush. The air carried the sharp scent of dew and the faint tang of compost, while a lark's trill pierced the morning fog. Alara's heart hummed with the rhythm of growth, a quiet pride in nurturing life from stubborn earth. She was 47, a botanist who'd abandoned academia for this patch of land in a forgotten coastal town. Her past lectures, sterile labs, a marriage that crumbled under ambition felt like a shadow now, distant yet heavy. She brushed the memory away, focusing on the bloom's velvet petals. A stranger appeared at her garden gate, his silhouette blurred by mist. His shoulders sagged under an unseen weight, his polished shoes caked in mud. Alara sensed his exhaustion, not just physical but soul-deep, in the way his fingers twitched at his sides. She rose, wiping her hands on her apron, and approached him. Without a word, she offered the crimson rose. It sent a fleeting gift. His eyes, stormy gray, flickered with something raw gratitude, perhaps, or recognition. He accepted it, his fingers brushing hers, warm despite the chill. Alara's pulse quickened, not from attraction but from the strange certainty that this moment held weight. She didn't know his name, but his presence felt like a stone dropped into her quiet pond, ripples already forming. The garden, her sanctuary, seemed to hum with new possibility, as if the earth itself sensed a shift. A single red petal fell, caught in the breeze, a motif of fleeting beauty that would linger. The stranger lingered by the gate, clutching the rose as if it were an anchor. Alara watched him, her breath catching on the salt-tinged air. His suit, tailored but creased, spoke of a world far from her garden-a city of glass towers, perhaps, where time moved in sharp, relentless ticks. She imagined him navigating boardrooms, his jaw tight, chasing something intangible. Her own past flickered, late nights in a lab, chasing prestige, her husband's voice fading as ambition drowned their love. She pushed the memory down, focusing on the stranger's hands, knuckles white around the rose's stem. He stepped closer, his boots sinking into the soft earth. The garden seemed to respond, leaves rustling in a breeze that carried the faint clink of wind chimes. Alara's introspection deepened. She'd chosen this life to escape the race, to find meaning in roots and blooms. Yet this man, with his weary gait, stirred a question: had she truly escaped, or merely hidden? She gestured toward a wooden bench, its paint chipped from years of salt air. He sat, the rose resting on his knee, its red stark against his gray suit. Alara knelt nearby, pruning a thorn stem, her movements deliberate. Snip, pause, place. The act grounded her, but her eyes kept drifting to him, to the way his shoulders softened, as if the garden's quiet was a balm. The red petal motif returned, caught in a spiderweb near the bench, trembling but unbroken. Their silence held a strange intimacy, a shared understanding woven through glances and gestures. Alara sensed he was running from something, just as she once had. The garden, alive with the hum of bees and the scent of loamy soil, felt like a crossroads, where two paths, hers and his, had unexpectedly met. The stranger's gaze drifted across the garden, settling on a cluster of wilting marigolds. Alara followed his eyes, noting the faint droop of their golden heads, a reminder of her own limits. Some things couldn't be saved. She remembered her first year here, hands raw from digging, determined to rebuild herself after her marriage collapsed. The marigolds had been her first planting, a symbol of resilience, yet now they faltered. Her heart twinged, not with failure but with acceptance. The stranger's fingers traced the rose's petals, his touch hesitant, as if he feared breaking something fragile. His exhaustion seemed to seep into the air, mingling with the scent of crushed herbs and damp earth. Alara moved to a nearby lavender bush, her fingers brushing its purple spikes, releasing a soothing fragrance. She recalled her mother's garden, the way lavender calmed her as a child, grounding her through chaos. The stranger's presence felt like an echo of that chaos, a man adrift in a storm she didn't yet understand. His eyes met hers, and in them, she saw a flicker of yearning not for her, but for the peace her garden held. She knelt again, her knees pressing into the cool soil, and began weeding, pull, twist, discard. The rhythm steadied her, but her mind raced. Who was he? Why here? The red petal appeared again, now pressed into the earth by his boot, its edges curling. The garden's quiet amplified their unspoken connection, a thread woven through shared silence and the weight of unseen burdens. Elara felt the stakes rising, not in words but in the air between them, thick with possibility. The lark's song faded, replaced by the distant crash of waves, signaling the world beyond her garden's borders, waiting to pull them both back. The sun climbed higher, burning off the morning fog, and Elara felt the warmth on her neck as she worked. The garden's scents sharpened rosemary, salt air, and the faint musk of turned soil. She glanced at the stranger, still on the bench, his fingers now still around the crimson rose. His face, etched with lines of strain, seemed to soften under the garden's spell. Elara's mind drifted to her early days here, fleeing the city's clamor after her divorce. She'd arrived with a single suitcase, her heart raw, seeking solace in seeds and silence. The memory stung, but it fueled her now, each plant a testament to her rebuilding. The stranger rose, his movements stiff, as if shaking off an invisible chain. He paced the garden path, his polished shoes leaving faint prints in the dirt. Elara watched, her hands pausing over a cluster of daisies. His pacing felt like a search, not for a place but for a feeling peace, perhaps, or absolution. She sensed a fracture in him, mirrored by her own past, the weight of expectations she'd once carried, the lectures she'd given to empty faces. She resumed her work, plucking wilted leaves with precision, pinch, pull, drop. The act was meditative, but his presence disrupted her rhythm, like a stone rippling her calm. The red petal motif reappeared, caught in a gust, skimming the path near his feet. Their eyes met again, his gaze heavy with unspoken questions. Elara felt the stakes deepen, a silent pact forming in the space between them. The garden, alive with the hum of insects and the creak of an old gate, seemed to hold its breath, waiting for what came next. Elara moved to a patch of thyme, its sharp scent rising as her fingers brushed the leaves. The stranger stopped pacing, his gaze fixed on a weathered sundial at the garden's center. Its shadow stretched long, marking time he seemed reluctant to acknowledge. Elara's mind wandered to her father, a clockmaker, whose hands moved with the same precision she now used in her garden. He'd taught her patience, but also the pain of time's relentless march. His death had pushed her to leave the city, to find a life unbound by schedules. The stranger's stillness now felt like a mirror, reflecting her own need to pause, to breathe. He knelt by the sundial, tracing its chipped edge, his fingers lingering as if seeking answers in the stone. Elara sensed his turmoil, a man caught in a life that no longer fit. Her own heart stirred, recalling nights spent questioning her choices. Had she traded ambition for isolation? She resumed her work, digging into the soil, scoop, sift, pat. The earth's coolness grounded her, but his presence pulled at her focus. The red petal appeared again, now tangled in the thyme, its edges frayed but vivid. Their connection deepened without words, a shared recognition of burdens carried too long. A neighbor, old Mr. Tamson, shuffled by the gate, his cane tapping rhythmically, eyeing the stranger with curiosity. Elara nodded to him, her gesture warm but brief. The garden's sounds waves crashing, bees droning wove a fragile cocoon around them, but the outside world loomed closer, its demands threatening to intrude. The stranger's hand clenched the rose, a silent vow to hold on to this moment, and Elara felt the weight of their meeting grow heavier. The air grew heavier, thick with the scent of salt and blooming jasmine. Elara stood, brushing soil from her knees, her eyes catching the stranger's as he rose from the sundial. His posture had shifted, less burdened, as if the garden's quiet had seeped into his bones. She remembered her first summer here, the way jasmine clung to the fence, its fragrance a promise of renewal. That hope had kept her going, even when loneliness crept in like frost. Now, this stranger's presence stirred that same hope, but also unease. His world, whatever it was, felt like a storm on her horizon. He wandered to a row of sunflowers, their golden heads towering, swaying faintly. His fingers brushed a petal, hesitant, as if touching something sacred. Elara's introspection deepened. She'd built this garden to anchor herself, but his arrival made her question its walls. Was she hiding, or healing? She moved to a watering can, its metal cool against her palm, and poured, tilt, stream, splash. The act steadied her, but her gaze lingered on him, on the way his eyes softened at the sunflower's glow. The red petal motif returned, now caught in a sunflower's shadow, half buried in the earth. A young girl, Lila, skipped by the gate, her laughter sharp and fleeting, a reminder of life beyond these borders. The stranger's head turned at the sound, his expression unreadable. Elara felt their connection tighten, a thread pulled taut by shared silence and the weight of choices unmade. The garden, vibrant with color and the distant roar of waves, seemed to pulse with their unspoken questions, urging them toward a truth neither could yet name. The afternoon sun hung low, casting amber light across the garden, where shadows stretched like fingers over the soil. Elara knelt by a bed of snapdragons, their pink and white blooms trembling in the breeze, scented with a faint peppery sweetness. Her hands worked steadily, pulling weeds with a familiar rhythm, grip, tug, release. The earth's coolness soothed her, but her mind churned. The stranger's presence, now a quiet fixture by the sunflowers, felt like a catalyst, stirring memories of her past life, conference halls, sterile air, the weight of a title she'd abandoned. She'd been a rising star in botany, but the cost of ambition had hollowed her out, leaving only this garden to fill the void. The stranger sat again, this time on a stone ledge near the garden's edge, the crimson rose still in his hand, its petals curling slightly. His eyes traced the snapdragons, but his thoughts seemed elsewhere, lost in a storm Elara could only guess at. She sensed a revelation brewing, not in words but in the way his shoulders tensed, as if bracing for a truth too heavy to carry. Her own heart quickened, recalling the moment she'd walked away from her old life, her suitcase heavy but her soul lighter. The red petal motif flickered, caught in a snapdragon's leaves, its crimson stark against the pale blooms. A fisherman, Tomas, passed the gate, his weathered face curious as he glanced at the stranger. Elara nodded, her gesture brief, but her focus stayed on the man, whose stillness now felt like the calm before a storm. The garden's sounds, rustling leaves, distant gulls seemed to hush, as if the earth itself sensed a shift, a truth about to break the surface. Elara moved to a patch of foxgloves, their tubular blooms swaying like bells, their faint honeyed scent mingling with the salt air. Her fingers brushed the velvety petals, but her thoughts lingered on the stranger, now standing, his gaze fixed on the horizon. She remembered her last day in the city, the weight of her decision to leave, a choice that felt like betrayal to some, freedom to her. The foxgloves reminded her of that moment, their delicate strength a mirror to her own. The stranger's presence now felt like a challenge, forcing her to confront the life she'd built. Was it enough, or had she merely traded one cage for another? He walked toward her, his steps slow, deliberate, each one sinking into the soft earth. His hand still clutched the rose, but his eyes held a new clarity, as if a decision had crystallized. Ilara's pulse quickened, sensing the shift. She recalled a colleague's words from years ago, "You can't run from yourself." The memory stung, but it sharpened her focus. She began deadheading the foxgloves, snip, drop, step. The act was grounding, but the stranger's approach felt like a tide pulling her towards something unknown. The red petal appeared again, now lodged in the grass near her feet, its edges worn but vibrant. A local baker, Clara, paused at the gate, her apron dusted with flour, eyeing the stranger with quiet suspicion. Ilara offered a small wave, but her attention stayed on him, his nearness amplifying the tension. The gardens hummed crickets, waves, the creak of a fence seemed to pulse with their shared silence, as if the world held its breath, waiting for the truth he carried to spill. The sky deepened to a bruised orange, the garden's colors softening as dusk crept in. Ilara stood by a trellis of climbing roses, their thorns catching the last light, their scent heavy with evening dew. She felt the stranger's gaze on her, steady now, as if he'd found something he'd been searching for. Her mind flickered to her mother's death, the final push that drove her here. Grief had been her architect, shaping this garden into a refuge. Now, this man's presence threatened to unravel it, his silent intensity pulling at her carefully built walls. She wondered what he fled from, what weight made his eyes so heavy. He stepped closer, stopping just beyond the trellis, the rose now tucked into his jacket pocket, its red tip barely visible. His hands flexed, as if releasing a long-held burden. Ilara sensed the revelation breaking, not in words but in his posture, the way his shoulders squared, as if ready to confess. She began tying back the roses, loop, knot, pull. The act anchored her, but her heart raced, anticipating the truth he carried. The red petal motif returned, caught in the trellis, trembling in the evening breeze. A boy, Milo, rode by on a bicycle, his laughter sharp, cutting through the garden's hush. Ilara glanced at him, then back to the stranger, whose eyes held hers with a raw, unspoken plea. The garden's sounds distant waves, the rustle of leaves faded, leaving only the weight of their shared moment. The truth, whatever it was, felt like a seed planted in the earth, ready to break through. Ilara's breath caught, knowing this encounter would change them both, the garden no longer just hers but theirs. Twilight settled over the garden, the air thick with the scent of cooling earth and fading jasmine. Ilara stood by a cluster of irises, their violet petals glowing faintly under the dimming sky. Her hands moved slowly, trimming stems with care, slice, pause, place. The act was her anchor, but the stranger's nearness pulled at her, his presence a tide against her carefully built shores. She recalled the nights she'd spent rebuilding herself here, each plant a step toward peace after her mother's death, her divorce, her surrender of ambition. Now, this man's silent intensity threatened to unearth those buried choices, forcing her to face them anew. The stranger stood by the trellis, the crimson rose still tucked in his pocket, its red tip a stark contrast to his gray suit. His hands clenched, then relaxed, as if wrestling with a decision. Ilara sensed the weight of his unspoken truth, a burden she recognized from her own past, the cost of a life driven by relentless pursuit. Her heart stirred, not with sympathy but with a shared reckoning. She wondered what he'd lost to arrive here, mud on his shoes, seeking solace in her garden. The red petal motif flickered, caught in an iris's shadow, its edges curling like a question unanswered. A neighbor, Mrs. Lorne, shuffled by the gate, her scarf fluttering, her glance at the stranger wary but fleeting. Elara nodded, her focus returning to the man, whose eyes now held a quiet resolve. The garden sounds crickets chirping, waves crashing softly seemed to tighten around them, amplifying the stakes. Their paths, once separate, now converged, and Elara felt the moment teetering, a confrontation not of words but of choices, each poised to reshape the other's world. Elara moved to a bed of lavender, its silvery leaves brushing her fingers, releasing a calming fragrance that mingled with the briny air. The stranger followed, his steps measured, stopping a few feet away. His eyes, once stormy, now held a clarity that unnerved her. She remembered her first winter here, alone, when lavender had been her solace, its scent soothing the ache of isolation. Now, this man's presence challenged that solitude, his silence a mirror to her own unspoken fears. Had she truly found peace, or merely buried her restlessness? The question gnawed, sharp as the thorns she'd once bled on. He reached into his pocket, pulling out the rose, its petals now bruised but vibrant. His fingers traced its edges, a gesture both tender and resolute, as if it held the weight of his story. Elara's pulse quickened, sensing the confrontation nearing, not anger, but a collision of truths. She began gathering lavender, pinch, bundle, tie. The rhythm steadied her, but his gaze pulled her back, heavy with intent. The red petal appeared again, now pressed into the soil by her foot, its crimson a quiet pulse in the fading light. A fisherman, Tomas, passed the gate again, his lantern swinging, casting fleeting shadows. Elara's nod was curt, her focus locked on the stranger, whose hand tightened around the rose. The gardens hummed soft wind, distant gulls felt like a tightening coil, urging them toward a moment of sacrifice. Elara's heart pounded, knowing whatever he revealed would demand something of her, too. Their shared silence, once a refuge, now felt like a battlefield, where choices could no longer be deferred. The garden darkened, stars piercing the indigo sky, their light faint against the glow of a rising moon. Elara stood by a row of dahlias, their bold blooms heavy with dew, their earthy scent grounding her. She felt the stranger's presence like a current, pulling her toward an edge she hadn't faced in years. Her mind flickered to her last lecture, the auditorium's hum, the moment she realized her work no longer held meaning. She'd walked away, choosing this garden over acclaim, but now this man's silent intensity forced her to question that choice. Was her peace real, or a fragile illusion? He stepped closer, the rose now held loosely, its thorns pricking his palm. His eyes met hers, raw and unguarded, as if ready to lay bare his truth. Elara's breath caught, sensing the sacrifice this moment demanded of him, of her. She began cutting dahlias, snip, lift, place. The act was deliberate, but her hands trembled, betraying her calm. The red petal motif returned, now caught in a dahlia's petals, its crimson a beacon in the moonlight. A young girl, Lila, passed the gate, her flashlight beam cutting through the dark, her giggle fading quickly. Elara's glance lingered, but her focus snapped back to the stranger, whose posture now carried a quiet surrender. The garden sounds night insects, the ocean's low roar wove a taut web around them, amplifying the weight of their convergence. Elara felt the moment crest, a high-stakes choice looming, not just for him but for her own guarded heart. The rose, the garden, the petal, all symbols of what they might lose or gain, held them in a fragile balance, poised for transformation. The moon hung full, bathing the garden in silver, its light catching the dew on Elara's hands as she tended a cluster of moonflowers. Their pale petals unfurled, releasing a sweet, musky scent that mingled with the ocean's briny tang. Her fingers moved gently, adjusting a stem, lift, twist, settle. The act was her refuge, but the stranger's presence, now just steps away, felt like a current pulling her toward an uncharted shore. She recalled her first night here, alone, the moonflowers her only company, their glow a promise of renewal after loss. Now, this man's silent weight forced her to face the life she'd built. Was it enough, or had she merely traded one form of running for another? The stranger stood by a willow, its drooping branches brushing the ground, the crimson rose still in his hand, its petals now wilting but vivid. His eyes, once clouded, held a quiet clarity, as if he'd found the courage to release his burden. Ilara's heart tightened, sensing the resolution nearing. She remembered her mother's final words, live true words that had driven her to this garden, to roots over accolades. The red petal motif flickered, caught in the willow's leaves, its crimson a faint pulse in the moonlight. A neighbor, Mr. Tamson, passed the gate, his cane tapping softly, his glance at the stranger heavy with unspoken questions. Ilara nodded, her focus locked on the man, whose posture now carried a gentle surrender. The garden's sounds, night crickets, the ocean's steady breath wove a delicate cocoon, holding them in this final moment. Their paths, once tangled, now aligned, and Ilara felt the weight of their shared truth, ready to bloom or break. Ilara moved to a patch of night-blooming jasmine, its fragrance sharp and heady, cutting through the cool air. Her hands brushed the delicate blooms, their texture soft as velvet, but her thoughts lingered on the stranger, now closer, his silhouette sharp against the willow's sway. She recalled her last day in the city, the weight of her choice to leave a suitcase, a bus ticket, a life shed like old skin. The jasmine scent had greeted her here, a balm for her fractured heart. Now, this man's presence stirred that fracture, his silence a mirror to her own unspoken fears. Had she truly found peace, or only paused her journey? The stranger stepped forward, the rose held loosely, its thorns no longer pricking his palm. His eyes met hers, raw and unguarded, as if offering his truth without words. Ilara's breath caught, sensing the resolution unfolding, not a confession, but a shared release. She began gathering jasmine, pluck, bundle, rest. The act grounded her, but her pulse raced, anticipating the weight of his story. The red petal appeared again, now nestled in the jasmine, its crimson softened by moonlight. A young girl, Lila, passed the gate, her flashlight beam dancing, her laughter a fleeting echo. Ilara's glance lingered, but her focus returned to the stranger, whose hand extended slightly, the rose an offering. The garden's hum soft waves, rustling leaves felt like a heartbeat, pulsing with their shared moment. Ilara sensed the sacrifice they'd both made her, a life of ambition, him, a world she could only guess at. Their connection, woven through silence and the garden's embrace, now demanded closure, a truth to carry them forward or set them free. The garden lay still, bathed in moonlight, the air heavy with the scent of moonflowers and salt. Ilara stood by a stone bench, its surface cool under her fingers, her heart steady but alive with possibility. She looked at the stranger, now just a step away, the rose in his hand a fragile bridge between them. Her mind flickered to her mother's garden, where she'd learned to love the earth, and to her own choice to build this sanctuary. This man, with his weary grace, had shown her the limits of that choice, not a failure, but a beginning. She'd found peace here, but his presence revealed a new truth: peace could be shared, not just guarded. He placed the rose on the bench, a silent gesture of release, his eyes holding hers with quiet gratitude. Ilara felt the weight of their journey, her solitude, his burdens resolve into something new, a connection forged in the garden's embrace. She began sweeping the path, brush, gather, pause. The act was final, a closing of one chapter, but her heart opened to what lay ahead. The red petal motif returned, now resting on the bench beside the rose, its crimson a symbol of their shared transformation. A boy, Milo, pedaled by the gate, his bicycle bell chiming faintly, a reminder of the world beyond. Elara smiled, her gaze returning to the stranger, whose face now held a quiet hope. The garden sounds waves, night birds, the whisper of leaves sang of closure, of growth. They stood together, not speaking, but bound by the truth they'd found. In sharing their burdens, they'd both found peace, the garden no longer just hers, but theirs, a living testament to resilience and renewal.